Meeting at Berkeley, California. Ernest O. Lawrence, Arthur H. Compton, Vannevar Bush, James B. Conant, Carl T. Compton and Alfred L. Loomis. The S1 committee meeting on the 18th of December, 1941 was pervaded by an atmosphere of enthusiasm and urgency. 21. In the wake of the attack on Pearl Harbor and the United States declaration of war on Japan and on Germany. 22. Work was proceeding on three techniques for isotope separation. Lawrence and his team at the University of California investigated electromagnetic separation. Ijah Murphy and Jesse Wakefield Beams's team looked into gaseous diffusion at Columbia University, and Philip Abelson directed research into thermal diffusion at the Carnegie Institution of Washington and later Naval Research Laboratory. 23. Murphy also headed an unsuccessful separation project using gas centrifuges. 24. Meanwhile, there were two lines of investigation into nuclear reactor technology. Harold Dewey researched heavy water at Columbia, while Arthur Compton organized the Metallurgical Laboratory in early 1942 to study plutonium and reactors using graphite as a neutron moderator. 25. The S1 committee recommended pursuing all five technologies. This was approved by Bush, Conant, and Brigadier General Wilhelm D. Steyer, who had been designated the Army's representative on nuclear matters. 23. Bush and Conant then took the recommendation to the top policy group with a budget proposal for $54 million for construction by the United States Army Corps of Engineers, $31 million for research and development by OSRD, and $5 million for contingencies in fiscal year 1943. They sent it on the 17th of June, 1942, top president, who approved it by writing OKFDR on the document. 23. Bomb design concepts. A series of doodles. Different fission bomb assembly methods explored during the July 1942 conference. Compton asked theoretical physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer of the University of California to take over research into fast neutron calculations, keto calculations of critical mass and weapon detonation from Gregory Briot, who hard quit on the 18th of May, 1942 because of concerns over lax operational security. 26. John H. Manley, a physicist at the Metallurgical Laboratory, was assigned to assist Oppenheimer by coordinating experimental physics groups scattered across the country. 27. Oppenheimer and Robert Serber of the University of Illinois examined the problems of neutron diffusion, how neutrons moved in a nuclear chain reaction, and hydrodynamics, how the explosion produced by a chain reaction might behave. 28. To review this work and the general theory of fission reactions, Oppenheimer and Fermi convened meetings at the University of Chicago in June and at the University of California in July 1942 with theoretical physicists Hans Bethe, John Van Vleck, Edward Teller, Emil Konopinski, Robert Serber, Stan Frankel, and Eldred C. Carlisle, Nelson, and experimental physicists Emilio Scr, Felix Bloch, Franco Rasetti, Manley, and Edwin Macmillan. They tentatively confirmed that a fission bomb was theoretically possible. 28. The properties of pure uranium-235 were relatively unknown, as were those of plutonium, which had only been discovered in February 1941 by Glenn Seaborg and his team. The scientists at the July 1942 Berkeley Conference envisioned creating plutonium in nuclear reactors where uranium-238 atoms absorbed neutrons that had been emitted from fissioning uranium-235. At this point no reactor had been built, and only tiny quantities of plutonium were available from cyclotrons. 29. Even by December 1943, only 2 milligrams had been produced. 30. There were many ways of arranging fissile material into a critical mass. The simplest was shooting a cylindrical plug into a sphere of active material with a tamper-dense material that would focus neutrons inward and keep the reacting mass together to increase its efficiency. 31. They also explored designs involving spheroids, a primitive form of implosion suggested by Richard C. Tolman, and the possibility of autocatalytic methods, which would increase the efficiency of the bomb as it exploded. 32. As the idea of the fission bomb was theoretically settled at least until more experimental data was available, Edward Teller pushed for discussion of a more powerful bomb, the super, now usually referred to as a hydrogen bomb, which would use the force of a detonating fission bomb to ignite a nuclear fusion reaction in deuterium and tritium. 33. Teller proposed scheme after scheme, but Bev refused each one. The fusion idea was put aside to concentrate on producing fission bombs. 34. Teller also raised the speculative possibility that an atomic bomb might ignite the atmosphere because of a hypothetical fusion reaction of nitrogen nuclei. Note 2. Bev calculated that it could not happen. 36. And a report co-authored by Teller showed that no self-propagating chain of nuclear reactions is likely to be started. 37. In Service account, Oppenheimer mentioned the possibility of this scenario to Arthur Compton, who didn't have enough sense to shut up about it. It somehow got into a document that went to Washington and was never laid to rest. Note 3. Organization. Manhattan District. The Chief of Engineers, Major General Eugene Reid, selected Colonel James C. Marshall to head Thermy's part of the project in June 1942. Marshall created a liaison office in Washington, D.C., but established its temporary headquarters at 270 Broadway in New York, where he could draw on administrative support from the Corps of Engineers North Atlantic Division. It was close to the Manhattan office of Stone and Webster, the principal project contractor, and to Columbia University. He had permission to draw on his former command, the Syracuse District, for staff, and he started with Lieutenant Colonel Kenneth Nichols, who became his deputy. 39. 40. Organization chart of the project, showing project headquarters divisions at the top, Manhattan District in the middle, and field offices at the bottom. The Manhattan Project Organizational Chart, the 1st of May 1946. Because most of his task involved construction, Marshall worked in cooperation with the head of the Corps of Engineers Construction Division, Major General Thomas M. Robbins, and his deputy, Colonel Leslie Groves. Reid, Somerville, and Steyer decided to call the project Development of Substitute Materials, but Groves felt that this would draw attention. Since engineer districts normally carried the name of the city where they were located, Marshall and Groves agreed to name the Army's component the Manhattan District. Reid officially created this district on the 13th of August. Informally, it was known as the Manhattan Engineer District, or MED. Unlike other districts, it had no geographic boundaries, and Marshall had the authority of our division engineer. Development of substitute materials remained as the official code name of the project as a whole, but was supplanted over time by Manhattan. 40. 41. Marshall later conceded that, I had never heard of atomic fission, but I did know that you could not build much of a plant, much less 4 of them for $90 million. 42. A single TNT plant that Nichols had recently built in Pennsylvania had cost $128 million. 43. Nor were they impressed with estimates to the nearest order of magnitude, which Groves compared with telling a caterer to prepare for between 10 and 1,000 guests. 44. A survey team from Stone and Webster had already scouted a site for the production plants. The War Production Board recommended sites around Knoxville, Tennessee, an isolated area where the Tennessee Valley Authority could supply ample electric power and the rivers could provide cooling water for the reactors. After examining several sites, the survey team selected one near Elza, Tennessee. Conant advised that it be acquired at once and Steyer agreed, but Marshall temporized, awaiting the results of Conant's reactor experiments. 45. Of prospective processes, only Lawrence's electromagnetic separation appeared sufficiently advanced for construction to commence. 46. Marshall and Nichols began assembling the resources they would need. The first step was to obtain a high priority rating for the project. The top ratings were AA1 through AA4 in descending order, although there was also a special AAA rating reserved for emergencies. Ratings AA1 and AA2 were for essential weapons and equipment, so Colonel Lucius D. Clay, the Deputy Chief of Staff at Services and Supply for Requirements and Resources, felt that the highest rating he could assign was AA3, although he was willing to provide AAA rating on request for critical materials if the need arose. 47. Nichols and Marshall were disappointed. AA3 was the same priority as Nichols' TNT plant in Pennsylvania. 48. Military Policy Committee. A man smiling in a suit and one in a uniform chat around a pile of twisted metal. Oppenheimer and Groves at the remains of the Trinity test in September 1945, 2 months after the test blast and just after the end of World War II. The white Yoga shoes prevented fallout from sticking to the soles of the shoes. 49. Vannevar Bush became dissatisfied with Colonel Marshall's failure to get the project moving forward expeditiously, 50, and felt that more aggressive leadership was required. He spoke to Harvey Bundy and Generals Marshall Somervell and Steyer about his concerns, advocating that the project be placed under a senior policy committee, with a prestigious officer, preferably Steyer, as director. 48. Somervell and Steyer selected Groves for the post. General Marshall ordered he be promoted to Brigadier General. 51. As it was felt that the title general would hold more sway with the academic scientists working on the project. 52. Groves' orders placed him directly under Somervell rather than Reid, with Colonel Marshall now answerable to Groves. 53. Groves established his headquarters in Washington, D.C., in the new War Department building, where Colonel Marshall had his liaison office. 54. He assumed command of the Manhattan Project on the 23rd of September, 1942. Later that day, he attended a meeting called by Stimson, which established a military policy committee, responsible to the top policy group, consisting of Bush, with Conant as an alternate, Steyer and Rear Admiral William R. Purnell. 51. Tolman and Conant were later appointed as Groves' scientific advisors. 55. On the 19th of September, Groves went to Donald Nelson, the chairman of the War Production Board, and asked for broad authority to issue a AAA rating wherever it was required. Nelson initially balked but quickly caved in when Groves threatened to go to the president. 56. Groves promised not to use the AAA rating unless it was necessary. It soon transpired that for routine requirements of the project the AAA rating was too high but the AA3 rating was too low. After a long campaign, Groves finally received AA1 authority on the 1st of July 1944. 57. According to Groves, in Washington you became aware of the importance of top priority. Most everything proposed in the Roosevelt administration would have top priority. That would last for about a week or two and then something else would get top priority. 58. One of Groves' early problems was to find a director for Project Y, the group that would design and build the bomb. The obvious choice was one of the three laboratory heads, Huey, Lawrence, or Compton, but they could not be spared. Compton recommended Oppenheimer, who was already intimately familiar with the bomb design concepts. However, Oppenheimer had little administrative experience, and, unlike Huey Lawrence and Compton, had not won a Nobel Prize, which many scientists felt that the head of such an important laboratory should have. There were also concerns about Oppenheimer's security status, as many of his associates were communists, including his wife, Kitty, his girlfriend, Jean Tatlock, and his brother, Frank. A long conversation in October 1942 convinced Groves and Nichols that Oppenheimer thoroughly understood the issues involved in setting up a laboratory in a remote area and should be appointed as its director. Groves personally waived